What up? This is Footwork Fight Talk back at ya. Let's talk, man. So, want to compare MMA and boxing. These two sports are pretty closely related. They began for pretty much as long as we can record human history in some form or another. You're just talking about two men going at each other with their hands, with their feet, whatever. And so they're kind of intertwined as you move through the Greco-Roman period, and then you come up through the ages into maybe the late 16th, 17th centuries, and then the 18th centuries, where you kind of came up with the markers of Queensberry rules to really kind of differentiate bare knuckle brawling when it comes to boxing and modern day boxing as we know it today, with gloves and with rules and things like that. So, and then with MMA, you had a lot of freestyle fighting that took place all over the world, but it kind of started to coalesce in the U.S. With a few events. One where you had wrestling that was taking place already, and it split off into a couple of offshoots in the early 20th century when you had your Olympic style wrestling, where you did the shoot grappling type of wrestling, and then from what you know today is pro wrestling. So it's been around for a long time. That's all that's kind of meant to set up, is that they've both been around for quite a while. They both, I believe, were in the Olympics back in the Grecian era. And so this contact sports, one is full contact and one is basically a semi-contact in terms of the upper body with boxing. So that being said, I want to try to compare a little bit more in terms of the sport itself, the techniques that are used, the industry, and just a little bit more. So I just kind of want to take a quick little dive into it. So come along with me. All right, so MMA, right? So with MMA, this is just my quick cursory look at it. And with that, you have basically 4 offensive weapons that are going to come with MMA itself. And what I've noticed is striking or punching, and then you have tackling or grappling and shooting, pretty much where one opponent is just going to basically bum rush the next opponent and try to get them to the ground by grabbing them around the waist or the body and just slamming them down, and and jumping on top of them and pounding them into submission. Then you also have kicking. Kicking is just another way of striking. So, those are kind of just 2 versions of the same thing when we're talking about striking. And then the ground game itself. So once you get your opponent to the ground, at that point, if you can't just pound them out and knock them out from a position where you are straddled on top of them, then you have to wrestle them. You have to try to break something or just force them into submission the best way you can. And so there's a lot of skill involved with that, and I do respect the ground game. I respect the history of where MMA is coming from, all the way back, through the ages and into the Horace Gracies, and then what we know as cage fighting, and then on into modern day MMA. So there's a lot of skill and a lot of technique that takes place in terms of MMA. Myself, I'm a boxing guy. I just think it's very artistic. It's an artistic form of violence. That's what it is. It's just 2 men squaring off. And I think the modern rules and the way that it is organized, it makes for the best showing. And keep in mind, these types of sports, they were pretty much exclusive to the upper class, up until, the late 1800s, going into the 19th century, and they were kind of modernized, especially when we're talking about boxing. So it was kind of designed to be pleasing to the spectator and minimize just the ugly violence of the sport, and more or less focus on the technique. So with MMA, you've got you've got those 4 different types of offensive attacks that you can make against your opponent. And then with your defense, when you're talking about the stand-up game for MMA, you're pretty much using your arms. You can duck, you can move using your feet rather, with your footwork. And you can move about. You can catch an opponent's punches, you can catch an opponent's kicks, and then you can push, pull, etc. So whatever you can do to defend yourself within that arena. So, that's a little bit about MMA. On the boxing side, it's pretty straightforward. You're standing up the entire time. There's a few basic rules in terms of not being able to bite, not being able to wrestle, but pretty much you are striking or punching your opponent using, either straight punches, hooks, uppercuts, etc. And then your opponent is able to defend themselves using their feet, moving out of the way, whether that's parallel or horizontal to the opponent that is directly in front of them. And so you can find angles using your upper body, shifting your weight, rocking back and forth, using your hands to catch punches, and then immediately respond with a punch while your opponent is punching so that you can catch them open. Okay, so that's just a little bit about how these 2 different sports vary. But again, me, myself, I'm a boxing fan, always have been for several decades now. But I do respect a lot of what MMA is bringing to the table. I think they're a new force. And one thing that I do like about it is that the matchmaking is done very well. I don't think that you have a lot of different governing bodies out there to kind of dictate, that they want to keep a guy undefeated and we'll just keep him over here on this channel and this station and just with this one title and they won't face anybody. From what I can see, MMA brings these guys together and you don't have a ton of undefeated fighters out there. These people get in the ring, they fight, and people get knocked out. And that's, one thing I can definitely appreciate about MMA is that they show knockouts, okay? And there are knockouts happening by kicks and punches and submissions, and it's very exciting to watch. Even for me, though, it can be a little bit brutal when they knock out an opponent and then they keep punching to someone who's completely unconscious. It just seemed like, what the heck? You know what I'm saying? It's like, really? It's a savage sport, and I love the savagery of it. But even, that part can be a little bit much, even for me, is in terms of the aesthetics of it. Once you got a guy out, it's a contest, and at that point it's over. But with MMA, it's as close to street fighting and real fighting as you're going to be able to get. And that's another thing that I can appreciate. So for those of you who are casuals to both of these, because I'm definitely a casual to MMA, but for those of us who are casuals to any one of these sports, the training, if you were to train in it, I think either one of them is useful to be able to handle yourself and get self-confidence. But MMA is probably closer to real world contact that you may have in cases of emergency. Somebody's threatening your person. You can use those type of skills in the real world. So again, I think those are points to be made for MMA. So the other thing is revenue of both of these industries. From my quick look into MMA, the revenue for 2021 was about 5.1 billion. And this was pulled from sportspromedia.com. That's sportspromedia.com online. So, that's pretty good from what I understand. What I found interesting is that I could not find anything online about the annual revenue for boxing. The Google searches just took me all over the place. So if you are watching this video and you are able to track this, maybe you got good sources, go ahead and share it with us. I'd like to see it in the comments. I'd like to continue the discussion between these two and what kind of makes them unique, but also similar. And then the other thing is is being able to sell it to the public by way of entertainment. And what I mean is movies in particular. So one thing about boxing is that it has been able to kind of sell stories, human stories, through the sport, and you know it can make for some really good stories at that. If you think back to things like Raging Bull, Rocky, Cinderella Man, etc., these are good movies that sell the human drama and the human story, and they have elements of actual fights. They're talking about fighters, but the bottom line is that they're selling a human story. And then in the ring, you're able to see people overcome, their fear or overcome doubt or show courage or determination. All these different human aspects are being shown inside of the ring. And because it's so artistic, you can see these things unfold right in front of you. Somebody lands a punch, somebody gets hurt by the punch, and then they come back and then they land another punch. With MMA, it's a little bit different. I don't think it's quite as graceful as boxing is. Boxing, you can put on this display of footwork and coordination and timing and rhythm, and it looks very good on television. It looks very good in front of the public, and like I said, you can sell the human drama through that, right? But with MMA, it's a little bit more brutal. It's a little bit more savage, and I don't think it relies as much as as boxing does in terms of the rhythm, the timing, the movement. I mean, all of that is at play, but it's not quite as artistic and rhythmic as when you look to compare it to boxing. That's the only point. All right. So movies, I don't really see a whole lot of movies with MMA that really sell the sport and sell the human drama through the sport. I think there's a few good movies out there. Those of you who are MMA fans, you can go out here and you can recommend in the comments ones that you think really sell MMA itself and sell the human story through MMA, and we can continue the discussion. But these are just a few thoughts that I had to kind of compare these two different sports, similar in some ways, different in others, and what are some of the strengths and weaknesses in each one of them. And so, again, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. This is Footwork Fight Talk. We out of here.